when you look at ESG data more broadly, it's not just qualitative or just quantitative information that we're seeking. It's not an either or. We really want both.
Joining me to share his insights on corporate governance and broader ESG issues from an investor perspective is Khalid Husain, Head of ESG with Cohen Steers. You were on a panel here at REITwise focused on corporate governance. How would you size up how the REIT industry measures compared to other industries in terms of corporate governance as well as broader ESG practices?
Having worked on ESG issues across a number of sectors, I would offer a few observations. One is that there's already very good voluntary disclosure. Over 90% of the top 100 companies in the REIT space by market cap already disclose on ESG data. The second is, you've got good reporting standards and platforms such as GRESB, and this really facilitates the viewing and reporting of ESG data. Certainly other industries have their own specific standards and platforms, but not all. The third point I'll note is that we place a lot of emphasis on capital allocation within governance, as well as within S, there's a lot of focus on demographics, tenant, workforce, and community relations, and certainly within environmental, a lot of focus on issues around climate risk. So, while there's a lot of good disclosure on ESG issues, we think this carries over in terms of willingness to engage with investors. And perhaps part of the reason why you see very few shareholder proposals on ESG topics within REITs is because of that willingness. There certainly have been a few that were filed in the past. These were withdrawn because of successful dialogue with investors. This is in contrast to other sectors, such as tech, consumer goods, energy, and utilities, where you see these proposals being filed on climate, diversity, and other topics.
As an investor, can you talk a little bit about the impact of regulatory and policy initiatives on climate change and human capital management disclosure?
To set kind of the bigger scene here, there are over 750 ESG-related policies and various types of regulations in place already worldwide. And most of these have emerged really in the last 20 or so years. And they've emerged because governments, policymakers, corporates, investors, and really society at large, they care about and they want to tackle issues like climate change, diversity, inequality, safety, and so on. As investors, we're particularly attuned to the impacts around financial materiality of ESG on companies, as well as things like reputational risk and bottom line business and financial outlook. So, while there's been good, meaningful voluntary disclosure on ESG issues, we think it's lacking on a couple of fronts. One is there's inconsistency in terms of scope, details, and comparability. And also, at times, there seems to be a lack of advancement in terms of discussion and analysis on what the ESG data really means.
And in your opinion, what should REITs and their shareholders keep in mind in terms of investor approaches to engagement and stewardship more broadly?
We certainly welcome constructive engagement with the boards and managements of companies that we invest in. With boards, we're interested in understanding how they're setting direction and strategy, what kinds of risk controls and oversight they have in place, and the overall sort of governance structures that are there to allow management to execute on these. And if management is having challenges or obstacles, how they're trying to overcome them. So these are important things that we look for. And we have policies on engagement, voting, and integration. And in a way, these are really signals to our companies on things that we care about and consider material. We think that integration and stewardship are really two parts of the same coin, in the sense that ESG data, scoring, and information helps us to focus in on certain areas of weakness, where to bring up topics for engagement informs our proxy voting. But at the same time, any insights we gain, from stewardship, can really enlarge our information set and help us to make better investment decisions.
Lastly, what do you see as perhaps some under-the-radar type ESG-related issues that could become a major focus for REIT investors over the next few years?
I would offer a couple of thoughts, and maybe this isn't so under the radar anymore, but on certain topical issues like climate change, we think the scope of what we and other investors would like to see is very likely to expand. So certainly we will continue to value emissions data, but we also want to understand how companies are using scenario analysis, what assumptions are built into those, what kinds of decarbonization pathways they anticipate undertaking, the risks of physical climate change, and really how this all comes together, in terms of the company's strategy, risk management, and overall governance. The other point I'll note is that, when you look at ESG data more broadly, it's not just qualitative or just quantitative information that we're seeking. It's not an either or. We really want both. And so it's good to have specific numbers around metrics, targets, and indicators. But we also want to understand, when you've set a target, how much CapEx will you need to deploy to get there, and what's the return on that investment? And what does it mean in terms of the company's competitive positioning over time? And what's the bottom line impacts to the company's business and financial outlook?